Is Bigfoot real?
I wish I knew. I mean, I'm out there searching, right? And it's definitely, what I will say is that it's really worthwhile of investigating.
Well, welcome to the show. On today's episode of The Saif Effect, I'm so grateful that we have none other than world-renowned Dr. Mireya Mayor. Mireya is a National Geographic explorer, a primatologist, and somebody who's dedicated your entire life to discovering and protecting wildlife. She's traveled to some of the most remote and dangerous places on Earth, searching for new species, including the world's smallest primate, the mouse lemur. But before you were trekking through the jungles, you were a Miami Dolphins cheerleader and a hard-hitting journalist. She's been called the female Indiana Jones. I think Dr. Mireya Mayor, instead of saying she's the female Indiana Jones should be called the male Dr. Mireya Mayor. And today we get to unpack your wildest stories. Welcome to the Saif Effect, my friend.
Thank you so much. And you know, I did tell Harrison Ford that over dinner.
Well, we got to dig into that. And a personal note to say that you and I have known each other a long time. How long have we been talking about trying to jam together like this?
I would say at least 5 years.
Well,
but it's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. So before we dig into the richness of your story, I also have to ask another question that's been on my mind.
Okay.
How did you survive a plane crash?
Well, I mean, I didn't have much control in that. But I will tell you, if you're going to get into a plane crash, the best way to do it is to have a plane full of nuns. And that's really what happened to me. I am not kidding. I thought it was rather curious that when I boarded this plane, I was actually in Congo. I'd just done an incredible gorilla trek, habituating gorillas that really had never been studied before. Literally, as I'm walking out of the forest, I get chased by a forest elephant. So already there, I knew, like, maybe this wasn't my lucky day.
This is why they call you her wildness.
Exactly.
You're being chased by a wild elephant.
I'm just trying to get home, right? And
She's trying to get home to her 6 children.
That's
Dr.
right.
Mireya Mayor is the mom of 6 children. So continue, please.
So I'm trying to get out of the forest. I get chased by a forest elephant. That should have been my first cue not to get on a plane, but I got on a plane. And I started noticing all these nuns getting on. And anyway, I didn't think much more of it until I was actually writing in my journal, and I look out the window and I see that we're really dropping fast in elevation. And of course, that startled me. And then we started going back up, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe they were avoiding clouds. Starts to happen again. This time, though, we're not going back up. And I look around the plane. All of the stewardesses are in plane crash mode position. Nobody's announced anything. No one knows what's going on. We're just going down. I'm starting to see the tips of the forest get closer and closer and closer as we're approaching. And I look around and I see all the nuns are like this. They're praying. And I got to tell you, here I am talking about it. So whatever they did worked. And so I always say, if you're going to crash, make sure you got some nuns on that plane praying for you.
If you're going to be in a plane crash, make sure that it's on a plane filled with nuns. So
I mean, that was like my lucky day, weirdly. But what's funny is what happened after that plane crash. So I survived that. And then, of course, we're all out there sort of in shock and waiting to be rescued. And we're in the middle of nowhere. A truck suddenly comes in and everybody starts to pile into the truck, and then they get taken away. And I'm still there, with thinking, oh boy. Another truck later, the villages start talking, and so they send another truck. Anyway, I finally get onto one of these trucks, and I get dropped off at a brothel. That was my rescue center, is a brothel. And I have to tell you, I went to sleep that night, and I never thought I'd appreciate cheap Chanel No. 5 as much as I did, because I was alive to smell it in the brothel.
Alive to smell it. So what a crazy way to start this episode of The Saif Effect. And
Bigfoot,
we're
nuns, and plane crashes.
We're hearing about, all the Saif Effect today. We're hearing about Bigfoot. We're hearing about a plane crash filled with nuns being chased by a forest elephant, and surviving to tell the story. And I want to rewind a bit because we jumped right into it, right? How does a Miami girl go from being a Miami Dolphins cheerleader to becoming a world-renowned National Geographic explorer? Tell us the story from little Mireya to now where you are today, Dr. Mireya Mayor, on surviving plane crashes, all of the things that you've done.
So little Mireya in Miami was Mireyita.
Mireyita.
Right? Or as my grandmother called me, Tana. I was brought up in this big city, not a lot of opportunities to really explore nature, like say someone growing up in Colorado or Wyoming, but I was obsessed with animals. I was the ultimate girly girl, and my mother and my grandmother made me these like frilly dresses, but I always wanted to spend my time up in a tree and observing animals, and I had a menagerie of animals at home, like cats, dogs, chicken, Margarita, my little pet chicken.
I had a pet chicken named Little Jean.
There you go. They could have been friends. But reptiles, creepy crawlies, I mean, you name it. I was really obsessed with animals. I was sort of that weird kid, but who liked dresses and girly things. And so when I became a Dolphins cheerleader, the really funny thing is that I had tried out in both junior high and high school to be on the cheerleading squad. And I didn't make it, Saif. They didn't pick me.
So
I was
you were not a
heartbroken.
cheerleader
No.
in middle school or high school,
No.
but you were an NFL cheerleader.
I danced ballet, but they'll take you because you're paying tuition.
Yeah.
But no, they didn't pick me, and I was so heartbroken. And then, but I was obsessed with football as well. I was the biggest Miami Dolphins fan. And so I thought, what better way to have front row seats, right? Because I don't think I could really afford the tickets at that point. Or maybe even now, but I wanted like these great seats. And I said, I'm going to try out to be a cheerleader. And here come, I'm not kidding you, some of the high school girls that I went to school with who were cheerleaders. And I see them at the tryouts and I'm like, oh, I'm toast. Never mind. Anyway, long story short, I made it. They didn't. Not that I'm happy about that, but it was like, I was in shock. And so it was also not something that I meant to do for the rest of my life, right? It wasn't a career path, but I thought it was just a really fun thing to do. And so I did it all throughout my first 4 years at the University of Miami, where I was studying. I was a pre-law student there at the time. And it was fantastic. But then all of a sudden—
If you'd gone on to law school, you and I might have gone to law school together.
We might
I went
have.
to the University of Miami for law school.
Well, there you go. And we might even still be here to having a very
Absolutely.
different conversation
Very
with
different.
no nuns on planes
No
or
nuns on planes,
forest
and
elephants
none of
included. But I was in this predicament where I had to take a science requirement. And the women's biology class, which is what I really wanted to take, was completely full. And I thought I could talk my way into it, but the professor was like, no go, like not happening. So I was like, all right, I look through and I see that there's this anthropology class. Like, I'm just going to take it and fulfill this requirement. Just get it out of the way. And funny enough, it changed my entire life. I started learning about all these primates that were on the verge of extinction. So many of them had never been studied. There were even a few of them that had never even been photographed. And then, no joke, right before cheerleading practice, I'm watching Gorillas in the Mist. I'm lacing up my shoes because I got to run out the door. And that was the moment that really, my aha moment, that changed the entire course of my life. Like, I knew right then and there that that's what I wanted to dedicate the entire rest of my life to.
That one anthropology class changed your life.
All of it.
So where did it go from there? I mean, you took that class. I mean, there has to be so much more from there to what has become your life's work.
A lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but mostly it was just this determination that nothing was going to get in the way. So I switched majors, which I was almost done. So it was like sort of starting over, but I didn't care. I switched majors. A lot of professors said, you're making a big mistake. There are no jobs. Also didn't care. I just wanted to do something that I felt really passionate about. And so I went up to my anthropology teacher, Dr. Linda Taylor, and I said, what do I do? Like, how do I get onto the field and become, a Diane Fossey, a Jane Goodall? And she said, well, the first thing you need to do is write a grant. And so I learned how to write a grant. And the great thing is that, and you would appreciate this as a pre-law student, I was a great writer. I was an English major, also majoring in philosophy. So I could both write and argue, which is exactly what writing a grant is. And so I got my first grant and I set off to the Amazon, to one of the most remote and unexplored regions of the Amazon in South America. And that was the
What
path
did your
that set me
family
on.
think?
Oh
Here's
my
this Miami
gosh.
girl, Mireyita, in the jungle. I mean, that must not have gone well. I mean, you and I both come from families that moved here. How did that sit with mom, with abuela, with everybody?
So the very funny thing, you get this. I grew up with three very strong Cuban women, right? My mom, my grandmother, and my aunt, my mom's sister. And if you know anything about Cuban mothers, they are extremely overprotective. So when I was a little girl and I asked my mom if I could join the Girl Scouts, she said, no way, that's far too dangerous, right? So now I'm telling her, all right, forget this Girl Scouts, Mom. I'm heading off to the most remote part of the Amazon by myself, and I'm going to live out of a dugout canoe, and I'm going to have a machete, and I'm just going to trek my way through, and, yeah, there's venomous snakes. I'll be fine. Yeah, my mom freaked out. My mom is, she's a retired nurse, so she only looked at the health negative risks aspects of this, right? She's like, you're going to die.
Malaria, dysentery, all of the TB, on and on and on.
And the obvious, there are no hospitals out there. There's no medical care, no treatment. So if something happens to you, yeah, you're done for. And so, yeah, she wasn't a happy camper. And then she supported me, though, in her Cuban mother way, which is, although she was upset and crying and all of that, she ironed my field pants. So I went into the jungle like looking sharp, in style. My mom had pressed my field pants.
I love that. What was that first expedition into the jungle like?
It was the most magical, wondrous disaster you could ever imagine. I mean, it was like suddenly I'm engulfed in trees. It's just this abyss, right? The sea of trees and impenetrable. And I really was, I mean, I thought machete just looked cool, right? It's a prop. No, like I was hacking my way through forest. I was living out of a dugout canoe. I had brought all the wrong things. You don't take a tent into the Amazon because there are a lot of snakes and all of this. So you want to be higher up. So I had to buy a hammock. I brought this ridiculous teddy bear backpack because it was cute. I brought a Calvin Klein field vest. I was so proud of this thing because it looked amazing and it looked like a field vest, but it was dry clean only.
The Miami girl obviously went to Dadeland before she got herself equipped for a jump. Burdines,
probably.
Right? Yes.
But it was like the coolest vest. But then we had like this, rainforest, right? It just rained and rained. And I see, dry clean only. Oops. I was so ill prepared. I didn't know what to expect. But I had this determination and this drive and this sort of this naive part of me that actually got me through it because I stumbled my way through, but I did it. And I fell more and more in love with it and actually found the animals that I was looking for, wrote up a scientific paper on behavior that had never been observed before. So it was a huge success. However, my mom wasn't completely wrong. A few months into this expedition, I did develop a severe blood infection. It was a systemic blood infection. And I nearly died out there because it took me a couple of weeks to get myself out of the jungle, back into the capital where there was still no medical treatment. Like I went to a hospital and dogs were running in the halls and the doctor looks at me and said, "Oh, you need a calcium shot." Meanwhile, my hands are the size of balloons, like basketballs, really. And no one really knew why. So I had to fly back home where my mom met me in tears and Cuban rage. And so te lo dije, right? And I was in the hospital for a couple of weeks and special forces medics were sent in. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. But you know what? It was in that hospital bed that I then led me to my next life-changing moment, which is I read an article in Time magazine and it was entitled Death Row, and it talked about the 25 most endangered primates in the world. And what got my attention, in addition to that, title, was that there were all these spectacular photographs, but there were 2 line drawings of 2 species of the animals. And I thought, well, that's really weird. Why would they use line drawings? And it got me curious, and and curiosity has always, it killed the cat, but it fed me, right? And it led me to all these adventures. And I realized that they'd never been studied. They'd never even been photographed, but yet they were the top 2 primate species about to disappear off the face of the earth. And that was it. And so I packed up my bags and I headed off to Madagascar where these lemurs are found.
So this one article sparked your imagination about what was possible out in the wildness.
Yes.
And as you were going through that transition of You were in college to grad school.
And I was still a cheerleader at the time.
Yeah. How did people? So what I want to ask is, when you traded pom-poms for
machete.
primates
Yeah.
and a machete, how did people in your field take you with that? Was it difficult getting taken seriously?
Yes. So the cheerleaders thought I'd completely lost my mind and asked if I was going to still be able to use a hairdryer out there, right? and everyone thought it was a phase, my mom included, right? Everyone thought, oh yeah, go get this out of your system, and we'll be here when you get back. And when I got to graduate school, shortly after this first expedition, I was met with the other side of it, which is, oh, well, what is this NFL cheerleader going to do in the field? Like, how is she going to? Meanwhile, I actually had more field experience than some of my professors at the time. So I thought, hey, I could hold my own. But here's what happened. I found myself for the very first time in my life, because I did sort of not fit the mold, right? I didn't, whatever a scientist looks like, right? When people say, oh, you don't look like a scientist, which, by the way, I've heard forever. I even had another scientist in the field, I overheard her like, who's the Barbie in the field, right? Even though I was an accomplished scientist at that point. So you always get this stereotype of what a scientist might look like or what their history might be. And I was the complete opposite of that.
Mireya, that's something about you. You are somebody who breaks the mold in everything that you do. So that point in your journey from having been a Dolphins cheerleader to now being engaged in primate research, you were searching for one of the two most vulnerable primates in the world, and trying to fill the question mark that scientists had of these two missing species that nobody had ever touched upon. There were no pictures. Tell us about that part of your journey in pursuit of discovering an entire species of missing primate.
So I found myself for the first time ever trying to change what I looked like, trying to dress differently. I mean, I'm a Miami girl, right? So we're a little bit more, anyway. I felt like I have to change all of this in order to be taken seriously. And it got to the point where I realized, no, I don't, because I'm already doing the work and I'm doing it well, and I'm leading huge expeditions, and I'm having success in finding these animals that other scientists failed to find. And so I started playing it up, the femininity up. I mean, funny as to drive a point home. That's why my book is called Pink Boots and a Machete, because I started flaunting pink boots.
I love that. Dr. Mireya Mayor's book is called Pink Boots and a Machete. So I'm saying machete like the way we would in Miami.
Machete.
Pink boots and a machete. So you leaned into who you are.
Totally leaned into who I thought. I'm not changing for anybody, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to kick some serious butt, and that's just the way it's going to be. And so when I was out there searching for one of these two, I eventually did find both of them. But when I was out there, I was walking 10 hours a day for weeks and weeks, not seeing anything. And I thought, oh boy, this will be my first failure right out in the field. And I couldn't let that happen. I refused. And I just kept going and going. And we went through droughts. We went through moments where we were completely out of food on the expedition. And I had a team of locals, right, who were supporting me on this mission. And I didn't want to let them down. And you would go into the villages and they had no food. And I mean, it was rough. And in going into one of those villages one day, the village elder said, I know where you can find those animals. And I took that right away. I said, would you join us on this expedition? I hired him. I hired his zebu to carry our stuff on an ox cart, right? And off we went. And we walked again 10 hours a day for like weeks. We finally got to a spot and they were literally coming down from the trees. And it was unheard of because these animals are like super shy, very elusive, very rare. And I looked at him and I said, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why are they not running? How did you know they were here? And he said, this is sacred ground. This is where people come to mourn when they lose a loved one. And so they're not scared of humans because they haven't had any negative interactions. And that was my first lesson in talk to the locals, listen to the locals, believe the locals, and really make them a part of your mission, because they have more knowledge than any of us ever will, right?
That's so beautiful. What did you learn about the human experience in discovering a primate that science had never uncovered before?
Well, that's a different primate, but that also happened because I took a risk. I take a lot of risks in my life. You could call them calculated risks, right? Not crazy risks, but always taking that chance. And while I was out there trying to look for these two particular ones, there was an area in the northeastern part of Madagascar that I realized had very little exploration by foreigners. And I was completely out of money. I was supposed to pack it up and go home. And I reached out to an organization and I said, hey, all I need is this tiny bit of money and I can get to this area. And I really thought that might lead to something. And I followed my gut. It's all about following your gut as well. I'm sure you have a million examples of that in your own life. But anyway, we get there, set up camp, and we set up these small little Sherman mammal traps, which basically just you put a little bait in there, the animal comes in and you take a look. That's how scientists get inventory of areas where you may not see all these animals. And I peek into this little trap and I see these two huge eyes peering back out at me. And I realize this is something not known to science, but now I had to prove it, which is a whole other story. But that's how we discovered, my colleague and I discovered this brand new species to science.
It's incredible to think that we live at a time. How many years ago was that?
Well, let's see. That was 19 years ago now.
To think that
not that long ago.
Not that
really.
long ago. How much of the natural world do we not know about?
Oh, so much. And that's just land. I mean, if you think about how little we know about the ocean, we know nothing. There's still so much out there. And I tell kids all the time, because I do a lot of lectures around the country, in theaters, universities, grade schools. And I especially tell the kids, don't let your smartphones fool you. You don't have all the answers at your fingertips, because we don't have all the answers. And the best way to get all the answers is to get out there, disconnect, actually, and explore, because there are still so many discoveries left to be made.
And you are an explorer.
Yes.
And I want to talk about this concept of, so you're part of a very elite group of leaders and explorers, having had the designation of being a National Geographic explorer. First of all, what is that like when all the explorers come together? Is it like what we think about in the movies, these people that have traversed the planet, they've been into the Arctic, and they get together? What is that like when you're together with your peers who have been to the depths of the ocean, to the highest mountains, to the most remote jungles and deserts? Mm-hmm. What does it feel like for you to be part of such a special group of humans who've dedicated themselves to discovery?
It's interesting because I really do believe that one of the biggest honors bestowed on me has been to be a National Geographic explorer for now nearly 3 decades and an Explorers Club fellow, and to have the opportunity to come together with these like-minded, adventurous, curious, dedicated planet change makers is really the best way to describe when this group comes together. And you can't help but feel super inspired. And the funny thing that I noticed that we all say about one another when we're in this room together is, wow, I feel like I haven't done enough. And I mean, you're talking about people who have done it all. But then you hear that next story, that next discovery, that next expedition. And you're just like, I haven't done enough, because there's this real, I feel like exploration really courses through my veins. I don't feel like it's something that I do. It's not a job. It's like, it's who I am. And I think we all have that in common.
And I want to underscore for everybody listening to the Saif Effect podcast, you are the mother of 6 children.
Yes.
So when you go out into the wild in exploration, you have so much that you're leaving behind. How does that feel when you go out there?
It's such a mixed bag. I mean, we talked about my plane crash. I had 2 kids at that time. And I remember as I was thinking that was it. I was in those final moments accepting my fate. There was this split window in my mind. And I remember going through a million images throughout my head, each kid on each side. And the one thing that I remember thinking that really still stays with me is, I'm never going to get to read to them again at night, like tuck them in. It's like the simplest of moments. That's what I was most fearful of never being able to do again. So I know there's a lot of risk in what I do when I leave them, but there is also so much amazing opportunity for them to learn as, sort of citizens of our planet and become culturally aware and engaged, and actually like it's infectious, like the adventure, the exploration, the curiosity. They all have that, and they have all participated in some way. And I specifically remember taking my 11-year-old at the time to Madagascar. I'd always said, I want to follow in your footsteps. I want to do exactly what you do. And she'd go to dress to school and she'd wear all my stuff like on career day. And, this is who I admire. And I kept saying, honey, you might want to go as someone else this year. Like, let's change it up.
What was that like taking your 11-year-old to Madagascar?
It was the most special experience of my life. Now, mind you, I'd taken, my now 19-year-old from the time she was 9 months old, right? She's too little to remember, but she was out there with me as an infant, as a toddler, all of it. But this 11-year-old went out there, and it was like watching myself as a little girl, because she just perfectly comfortable running around the woods, chasing chickens with the kids, observing the animals, eating it all up in such a beautiful way. And before we left, and mind you, Madagascar is not an easy place by any means for anything. It's one of the most magical, wondrous places that I've ever been to, but it's the poorest country in the world, right? So here's a kid who sort of has it all, and then they're out there roughing it and no air conditioning and, all of these different changes. I didn't know how she'd react. And what she said to me before we left was, Mom, can we move here? Can we please live here? And I knew then that it was like the most amazing thing that I had ever done, was to share all of that with her.
And you have been somebody who's been the beneficiary of some of the greatest scientists and explorers in the world. And one of the relationships that you have as one of your friends that I've always marveled at is your relationship with Jane Goodall.
Oh my gosh, she's so great.
And what's the best advice that Jane Goodall has ever given you?
Well, it may not be what you think I'm going to say, but actually the best piece of advice she ever gave me was, don't give a bleep about what anybody says or thinks, because she was really criticized when she started off in her career. Because,
and give us a little blurb, because there's some people who are watching the Saif Effect. They tune in because of founders and venture capitalists, and we're talking about the wild world. Who is Jane Goodall?
So Dr. Jane Goodall, basically is revolutionized, right? The way we understood even mankind. She's a primatologist. She has spent over 60 years she was in Gombe studying chimpanzees, was the first to really go out there and do a long-term study and observe the behavior of these animals. She is the one who realized that humans were not the only ones to use tools, that chimpanzees also use tools. And that was a game changer, because by definition in anthropology, humans were the tool makers. So it was either we're going to have to add, chimpanzees to that definition, or we're going to have to redefine human. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
And it's clear, something that I love in the way you've described it to me is that the wild world still matters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that there's so much about us as humans that can come from that deeper discovery and that deeper curiosity. One of the other explorers that you're connected to, and again, if you know Dr. Mireya Mayor, she's got this extraordinary lineup of friends that are some of the most famous scientists and researchers, one of whom, of course, is Dr. Jane Goodall, and the other one is Dr. Sylvia Earle.
Oh my gosh.
Who is what Dr. Goodall has done to land and an understanding of primates, Dr. Sylvia Earle has done for our understanding of the oceans.
She is known as her deepness. She was on the cover of Time magazine. I mean, she's a legend as a hero of the planet. She is a legend, a living legend. And she has inspired me so very much. And in fact, someone wrote an article about both of us, and that's how I got coined her wildness, because it was her deepness and her wildness. And Sylvia actually inspired me to take on more than just the land, and it was a very sort of powerful shift. I recently nominated right here in Florida, the Florida Keys, Biscayne Bay, and 10,000 Islands as a Florida International University, sponsored Hope Spot. And this is a really big deal because Sylvia Earle's Hope Spots get a lot of attention. It really gives them a platform for people to learn about these places. And by learning about them, they fall in love with these places. And by falling in love with them, there's that desire to protect them. And so I suddenly realized that as much as, obviously, I love all the wild, the Amazon, Madagascar, the Congo, all of these, land-based areas, we are water, right? There is nothing more that we are connected to than water. And it was really important to me to also try and make a difference in that regard. And that was all because of Sylvia. She just inspired it, as she does so many.
And I think it's so important because a lot of us who might live in South Florida, what you did in working to seek that designation for these areas in our region, Biscayne Bay, and of course what we know with the Everglades, that we are adjacent, we are living right here amongst one of the most beautiful ecologies in the world. And you've challenged a lot of us to think about how we interact with the wild world. What advice do you give to young people? Because you speak at schools all over America, all over the world, about this desire and hunger to learn more about the natural world, starting in your own background. What advice do you give to those young people?
I mean, in general, the advice I give young people is to dream big and to just go for it, right? When it comes to the natural world, it's really about, what kind of difference do you want to make? And each and every child and each and every person actually on the planet has the ability to make a difference. Now, what you choose to do, how you choose to live your life on the daily is, do you make a good difference or do you make a bad difference? And even the most minimal of efforts, like for example, Jane Goodall, she gives this example of how she travels a lot in order to spread the message of hope and awareness and different things. And she takes this one little bar of soap because she stays in all these hotels. She doesn't unwrap every hotel soap that she goes to. This one little bar of soap goes with her everywhere until it's completely disappeared. And then she goes to the next one. And that seems so insignificant. But actually, when you know what goes into packaging of different things like soap and manufacturing and everything else, every one of those tiny little changes makes a huge impact on our planet. So being a responsible shopper, knowing what materials, how it was manufactured, where it came from, right? For a long time, guitar companies were pulling out redwood trees out of Madagascar in order to make their guitars. There's no need for that, right? Not this day and age. So just being super aware and knowing that you can make a difference is empowering, I think.
I want to go back to Dr. Mayor in the wild. What's the most terrifying experience that you've ever had?
Most people expect me to give an animal story, right?
Yeah.
So I've been charged by dozens of gorillas. I've been chased by forest elephants. I've gone diving with actually a particular group of sharks that was exhibiting incredible amounts of aggression, right? So I've been in dangerous, let's say, but those are calculated dangers because I know how animals behave. I know how to predict, certain behaviors and know what the threats really are. It's people. That's the scariest animal that I have faced out in the wild is people. I've been in situations, for example, in the Amazon where port knockers, in Guyana.
That's right. That's my country of birth, Guyana.
Yes, in Guyana, you know all about the port knockers and the miners who basically live in the forest as they they mine these areas, and it can be very dangerous for a young woman on her own, or anybody actually, to come face to face in the middle of nowhere with these guys. In Congo, my passport got ripped out of my hand, and they looked at it and said, "This isn't really you," and tossed it into a ditch. And I really didn't know what was going to happen next. And I've come into situations in like a lot of war-torn areas in these very remote places where, yeah, I wasn't really sure. And some of my colleagues haven't been lucky to get out alive. So that's what scares me the most out there, is I find people to be the most unpredictable.
That's unbelievable to think that the scariest part of having been out in the wild for Dr. Mayor has been some of her experiences with people. What's the biggest myth about exploration that you hear that drives you crazy?
I mean, I think sometimes people think exploration is somehow glamorous, right? and exploration is
so it's not all Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh my gosh, no, right? Because the movies, for it's hard work, and it takes unbelievable amount of patience, and sometimes it can be actually incredibly boring. It's not always exciting. Sometimes I'm, either looking for an animal for months at a time and seeing nothing, or I've got gorillas right in front of me who just like, they'll eat a few leaves, they'll move a few feet, and then they go to sleep for like the next 8 hours. So like sometimes it's just this incredible amount of patience, and that's not always easy, right? It's but the hardest part is really missing, my loved ones and my family when I'm away.
And you have, as we've already mentioned, 6 beautiful children. You have a husband, Phil, who himself is a quite accomplished documentary filmmaker and has been involved in production for a very, very long time. How has being a mom changed the way you approach your work? And has it?
I think it's motivated me more to make more of a change. So when my colleague and I discovered this little mouse lemur, right? Smallest primate on Earth, weighs less than 2 ounces, fits in the palm of your hand. I mean, that's already sort of a big moment. And it wasn't enough for me because I was a mom. I thought I need to take this and do something really significant with it. And so I met with the president and the prime minister of Madagascar, and they got really excited, and as a result, declared the area a national park. And so that created real change, because now this tiny little animal became a huge ambassador for the thousands of other species that live in that area. So I think my kids have fueled me more, and they're like a driving factor in wanting to leave the place a better place.
And I think that that's an inspiration for a lot of people, because many of us don't know what it means to be engaged in conservation. And we think about here in South Florida and the Everglades, being able to go out to places like Shark Valley, to go out on the Nhinga Trail. My wife Amira and I, 2 of our kids have been part of the scouting movement, and our son Nabil, who will make an Eagle Scout hopefully in a few months.
Good job letting them do that.
Yeah, we're very excited. And he and I have actually, I've done my own form of exploration. And in fact, last summer went on Northern Tier, which meant that I explored the boundary waters between America and Canada with my son and 7 other Boy Scouts. And it was 6 days in the wild on a canoe where we did almost 60 miles. No telephone, no access to the internet. I probably learned more about not only myself, but the human experience by going through that. And you've lived that in your journey. I've got that for 6 days. How has that changed the way you think about this world that we're in now, where all we can do is talk about AI and technology, but there's so much inward and outward about the wildness? How has that informed your perspective of the world?
I mean, there are times where I've been disconnected from the world for 10 months at a time, and where I didn't know a thing about what was going on in the outside world, because I was that far out, that remote, and didn't have that connection. I think that we are way too disconnected from nature. I think that, do my kids have iPads and iPhones? Yes. Do I let them use it? Yes. I think it's also an important tool of modern day. But I think that we need to emphasize more, and this goes not just for kids, for everybody, spending, like you just said, more time in nature, disconnected, and really I feel like humans have sort of lost the ability to follow their gut and that intuition and this reflection and learning that happens when you're not scrolling through, when your mind isn't constantly, gripped by an electronic device. I think that there's so much learning that happens when you're completely removed from that world and just let yourself observe and hear the quiet and really kind of reflect on what's going on inside.
I couldn't agree more. The most beautiful experience I think I've had in the last many years was being out there with my son and being able to experience what the boundary waters between America and Canada. When you sit there and it's as the sun is setting and you see the stillness of a lake and an area where there are no other human beings, and you just listen to the nature and just what's out there beyond us as humans, we're reminded of this idea of the wildness that you talk so much about.
Yeah.
And I want to change the page for a second and touch upon something that I asked at the beginning, which is that you've been part of a award-winning TV show in pursuit of an understanding of Bigfoot. And so tell us a little bit about that. How did you get involved with that project? And it's probably something that a lot of people ask you about.
So rewinding a little bit, I was part of a show on History Channel called Expedition Africa, where I trekked over 1,000 miles across Africa. It was a Mark Burnett produced show. And
Mark Burnett's the creator, Survivor, and
The
probably
Apprentice,
some of the greatest
yes.
reality shows and exploration shows ever.
And it was a great idea because it was taking basically 4 modern day explorers and retracing the famous search of Henry Morton Stanley's search for Dr. David Livingstone and not giving us modern day tools. So we had a sextant, we had a compass, very, very few amenities, let's say, and definitely no technology.
I don't think I can make it to Broward without Waze or Google Maps.
Oh my gosh.
So I have to say.
But it was incredible because what I realized is, and why I wanted to take part in this, is that I have always had such deep admiration for the pioneering explorers like Livingstone and Burton and Speke. I mean, if you haven't read their journals, please do so. They're fascinating. And I felt a real kinship with them. So I wanted to follow in those same footsteps. And the nature hasn't changed, the challenges, the weather, the animals. So that's all remained the same. So it was a really incredible experience. But one of the network executives on that show rang me up a few years later, about 6 years ago, and said, "Hey, we're putting together a team for a show called Expedition Bigfoot, and I wanted to ask you if you'd be interested." And immediately I said no. I was like, why would you think I'd be interested? I know nothing about Bigfoot. That's not my thing. I mean, sounds great. Good luck. And he said, no, we want you precisely because of that, because, you kind of have no skin in that game, right? And you're a scientist, and we want to ground the show in science. And so anyway, he talked me into it, and I thought, well, let's see what this is all about.
Dr. Mayor gets offered another TV show deal, and her first instinct is to actually turn down a TV show deal. So
I gotta
Bigfoot,
love it. I gotta feel passionate about it.
You're saying to yourself, I'm a world-renowned primatologist. I've discovered species out there like the mouse lemur. And now here's a TV producer who's saying, hey, will you come and join us in this expedition Bigfoot? But probably because they wanted your scientific skepticism.
Well, that's exactly what they wanted. But here's what's or I don't know if it's funny or ironic, but it was so fitting, is that I suddenly realized I had spent my entire career searching for rare and elusive animals, some of which had never been studied and many of which had never even been photographed. I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar. And then discovered the world's smallest primate. And that was kind of a fun twist on it, because I thought, well, if I could discover the world's smallest, how hard could it be to discover the largest? This would be full circle, and sure, why not? But what I discovered is that, the way that media works today and the way people get their information, it's really through edutainment, right? Education and entertainment meshed together. And Bigfoot is this incredible vehicle for science communication, which I'm incredibly passionate about, because I think the only way to get everyone, engaged and wanting to make a change and wanting to protect our planet is to get them to care about it. And so Bigfoot is really actually such an amazing tool of spreading that message. And so anyway, I agreed to do it reluctantly. And now, 6 years later, still doing it. But it has
6 years
been...
later, Dr. Mayor is still on Expedition Bigfoot.
But here's what's great about it. Yes, on Discovery Channel,
on
Wednesday
Discovery
nights
Channel.
at 10 p.m. Eastern time.
Are there shreds of doubt that you have? I mean, is there anything that you are like, there's something out there?
So Bigfoot is surrounded by this high strangeness that I have to say is intriguing and science can't explain. And I love thinking that there are things science can't explain. And I do think that there are examples of this in the world that we're very familiar with. But I've talked to physicists, world-renowned physicists, and they're like, yeah, there's a mathematical model for that, to explain that. So is it possible? It absolutely is possible. But the thing that I love most about Bigfoot is that it gets people in their living rooms who love Bigfoot to learn about the scientific methods, to learn about how we go on to identify a new species. And at the end of it all, curiosity is what fuels science, and discovery begins with exploration. And Bigfoot is all about that.
I love that line. Discovery begins with exploration. Dr. Mayor, something about young people is these TV shows that we all grew up with. I remember Mr. Wizard. Anybody remember Mr. Wizard back in the day? That was awesome. And then, of course, we know Bill Nye, the science guy, and the list goes on and on and on. Right? Steve Irwin.
Yeah.
I think it would be great to see you one day do a show that's igniting the imagination of young people. Have you thought about doing something like that? Maybe a YouTube science show?
That would be a dream. Because for me, and especially being a mom of 6, by the way, 5 of those are girls. It's all about inspiring that next generation of scientists and change makers and planet caretakers, and especially the girls. I'm very passionate about STEM, and I want to see more girls get into the field. Girls want to do science, and we need to give them that platform and that avenue, and they need to, I think, see themselves in the person spreading that message. And so, yes, that would be a dream for me. I would love to do that.
So you might remember, because back in the pandemic, I had a Facebook Live show called Cafecito Chat, and you were on it. Do you remember that? That was different.
Of course I do.
The Saif effect is that we did kill it. The Saif effect is a little bit different than Cafecito Chat.
Well, for one thing, where's my cafecito?
Yeah, we did have a cortadito before we went on. And for any of our partners looking out there, the Saif effect will happily take a cafecito sponsor. But you remember I had something called the Fuego round. Yes. Which is the lightning questions.
Are we doing that?
We are doing a Fuego round.
No
paragraph answers.
Okay.
This is not a 5-paragraph essay. It is just think, dale, let's go. Most unexpected lesson from nature.
Most unexpected, sorry, that was the most unexpected question, but the most unexpected lesson. Oh, it would have to be to pivot. You plan and then nature happens. You have to learn how to pivot. And I think that's a great lesson in life, is you got to go with the flow.
Got to go with the flow. Favorite spot to hang out in Miami?
I love Merrick Park. I just like walking around and looking at all the stuff I can't buy.
You can't, you have to say this, the most Miami girl thing. Here we have Mireya. She's traveled the world. She's been into the jungles, and her favorite place to go, for those of you who don't know, Merrick Park is one of the nicest malls in Miami. So when you're not exploring for 10 months offline, you're in a place where most people are sitting there staring and scrolling at Instagram. So, okay, remember.
And the beach.
And the beach, of course.
Yes.
And the beach. One survival skill everyone should know.
Oh, this is a funny one, but always carry a tampon with you out in the woods, because it makes for great kindling. And you got to keep warm.
Great advice. If you weren't an explorer, what would you be?
I can't imagine doing anything else. If you force me to, Probably the law route, because I would be fighting for nature from that side.
I think the world would have lost out so much. The idea of you being a lawyer, even if you're doing environmental justice or something like that, we would have all collectively, humanity and science, lost out. Best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received would be from my mom, which is just never take no for an answer, like never give up. I mean, I have this sort of this resilience and this stubbornness, which comes with being Cuban, but also from this upbringing that there is nothing that you can't do and there is nothing to stop you from doing it. And having that in sort of in my back pocket at all times, especially I am in a very male-dominated field and it can be really challenging, and the work that I do is very challenging. And so that makes me just push forward every time and never give up and not take no.
One word to describe your life.
Adventurous. Hectic. Crazy. That's more than one word, but they all fit.
I love that idea of adventure. And I love that, Dr. Mayor, you have put out into this world this idea of the wild and wildness. And so we wish you the absolute best in your journeys,
Thank you.
Both here in Miami and around the world. I would love one day. I mean, we have to go on an adventure.
On an expedition.
I'm somebody. I'm not really great at going out there.
This would make for a great podcast. By the way,
it would make
you out in the field eating sardines out of a can and some beans.
That would make
sleeping in a tent.
I don't. There's a lot there.
Let's
I don't
do
know
it.
if they have. I'll be able to use my hair pomade or any of my other.
You can bring it.
I can bring it. I can bring it.
I still hey, that's one other thing. When you're out in the field, you can still look good.
You can still look good out in the field. Well, thank you for everything that you're doing for science. Thank you everything that you're doing to really explore those parts of our world that are oftentimes forgotten and unknown. And I want to appreciate you for coming on to the Saif Effect. Keep exploring, keep encouraging all of us to stay curious. And maybe for those of you who are listening out, keep an open mind about Bigfoot. And once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mireya, for joining us for this episode of The Saif Effect. The Saif Effect is filmed right here at Grove Station Studio. We're available on YouTube and all of your favorite places to check out your podcast. Stay tuned. Hit like and subscribe in the link below. Thanks, everyone.
Human connections spark ideas, and ideas ignite change. And sometimes magic happens when they all collide. Welcome to the Saif Effect, where conversations lead to unexpected possibilities.